Keanu Reeves walked into a luxury boutique, only to be judged and dismissed based on his casual appearance. But when he returned the next day, elegantly dressed and with undeniable authority, he delivered a lesson in humility and respect that left the store staff stunned. What happened next changed everything. Forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The golden glow of the setting sun bathed Rodeo Drive in warm hues, its golden light reflecting off the pristine glass windows of the high-end boutiques lining the street. The evening air carried the crisp scent of polished leather, designer perfumes, and the faint murmur of conversation among the wealthy elite who strolled along the luxury strip. Expensive cars hummed by, sleek Lamborghinis, glossy Rolls-Royces, and chauffeured Bentleys, each a symbol of status in a world obsessed with appearances. Among the crowd, Keanu Reeves walked leisurely, hands tucked in the pockets of his faded jeans, a plain black t-shirt draping effortlessly over his lean frame. His worn sneakers padded against the marble sidewalk, making no noise, no statement, just another man blending into the crowd. But beneath his humble appearance, he carried the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the world beyond these glittering streets. Keanu wasn't here to turn heads. He had no interest in flaunting his wealth or drawing attention to himself. He had come for one reason only, a simple yet meaningful gift for someone special. His eyes flickered to the elegant Lavelle Luxe, one of the most exclusive boutiques in Los Angeles. The boutique was known for catering to the ultra-rich, its clientele a mix of celebrities, socialites, and business tycoons who thought nothing of dropping tens of thousands of dollars on a single shopping trip. Through the polished glass display, something caught his eye. A luxury watch, resting beneath an opulent spotlight, its face glimmering like a miniature galaxy. The craftsmanship was impeccable, the design timeless. It was perfect. A small smile touched his lips as he imagined the reaction of the person he intended to gift it to. With effortless ease, Keanu reached for the door handle. It was cool and smooth, polished to a mirror-like finish. But just as he was about to push it open, a voice stopped him. "Excuse me, sir." The voice carried the unmistakable tone of politeness laced with judgment. Keanu turned his head slightly to meet the eyes of a sharply dressed sales associate standing just inside the doorway. The young man's suit was immaculate, tailored to perfection, the kind of attire that screamed luxury and exclusivity. His name tag gleamed under the soft boutique lighting. Ryan. Ryan's eyes flickered up and down Keanu's appearance, his casual clothes, his well-worn sneakers, the absence of a designer label anywhere on his person. The barely hidden disdain behind his polite smile was impossible to miss. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Ryan asked smoothly, his hands clasped in front of him in what seemed like a rehearsed gesture of practiced professionalism. For a brief moment, Keanu said nothing. He simply tilted his head, his expression calm yet unreadable. His eyes, deep and perceptive, held no trace of anger, only curiosity. "I believe so," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'd like to buy a gift." Ryan hesitated, shifting his weight slightly. He was used to high-profile clients walking in with an air of arrogance, their status announced before they even spoke. But this man? He didn't fit. He lacked the pristine polish of the wealthy clientele the store usually catered to. Ryan cast a glance over his shoulder toward a colleague at the counter who had also noticed Keanu's presence. The woman gave Ryan a knowing look, as if silently confirming what he already suspected: this man couldn't possibly afford to shop here. He turned back to Keanu, his professional mask never slipping, but his voice now carried an unmistakable edge of condescension. "Well, this store caters to a very exclusive clientele," he said carefully. "Without an appointment or the means to shop here, we encourage visitors to look elsewhere." Keanu didn't flinch. He had heard words like these before, not as a Hollywood star, but long before, back when he had struggled, before the fame, before the fortune. The arrogance in Ryan's tone, the assumption that his worth was tied to the way he looked, was something many had experienced. The boutique had fallen completely silent now. A few well-dressed customers nearby had taken notice of the exchange. Their interest piqued. Some whispered among themselves, throwing occasional glances in Keanu's direction. To them, he was just some average man who had wandered in by mistake. Still, Keanu's composure never wavered. He neither argued nor protested. Instead, he let out a quiet breath of amusement, shaking his head just slightly. "I understand," he said simply. "Thank you for letting me know." Ryan blinked, momentarily thrown off by the lack of resistance. He had expected frustration, embarrassment, maybe even anger, but Keanu gave him none of that. And just like that, without another word, Keanu turned and walked away. As the door swung shut behind him, Ryan let out a small, satisfied sigh, believing he had just spared the boutique the inconvenience of an unqualified shopper. He straightened his tie, feeling a misplaced sense of accomplishment. From her position at the counter, his colleague smirked. "Did he really think he could just walk in here and shop?" she murmured, barely suppressing a laugh. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "Happens all the time," he muttered. "Some people just don't know their place." Satisfied, the two of them returned to their duties. The brief interruption was forgotten within moments as the store returned to its usual rhythm. Unaware that they had just made a mistake they would regret, because the man they had just turned away was not just any man. He was Keanu Reeves, and he wasn't done with Lavelle Lux yet. The warm glow of Rodeo Drive's golden hour faded as Keanu Reeves walked away from Lavelle Lux, his hands still casually tucked in his pockets. His expression remained neutral, unreadable, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, not resentment, but something more measured, understanding, reflection. For years, Keanu had observed the way status and wealth dictated respect in certain circles. He had seen it long before he became famous, when he struggled to make ends meet, when doors were shut in his face simply because of the way he looked. Now, despite being one of the most recognizable and beloved actors in the world, he had just been dismissed as unworthy by a store that prided itself on luxury. He wasn't upset, not for himself at least. He could have laughed off the incident and moved on, buying the watch elsewhere. But something about the absolute certainty in Ryan's voice, the casual dismissal, the assumption that he didn't belong, it all reminded him of how easily people could be reduced to appearances, and he knew that if he had been someone else, someone without his success or financial means, the rejection might have stung in a way that lingered. Keanu pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. He tapped the screen and lifted the phone to his ear. After a few rings, a voice on the other end answered. "Keanu, what's up, man?" A small, knowing smile played at Keanu's lips. Michael Langford, the owner of Lavelle Lux, had been a long-time acquaintance, one of the few in the luxury business who valued character over image. The irony of the situation was not lost on Keanu. "Hey, Michael," Keanu said smoothly, "you still own that boutique on Rodeo?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. "I do. Why? Thinking about stopping by?" Keanu's smile deepened. "I already did." The amusement in Michael's voice faded slightly, sensing something in Keanu's tone. "And?" Keanu exhaled, his voice calm but deliberate. "Let's just say, your staff made an interesting first impression." Silence stretched over the line, then Michael sighed. "Tell me what happened." Keanu relayed the incident in his usual understated manner, leaving out any bitterness or ego. He spoke simply, factually, letting the story tell itself. By the time he finished, Michael was dead silent. Then, a quiet curse. "Damn it, I can't believe this." Keanu chuckled softly. "Believe it, but I'm not calling to complain." Michael hesitated. No, Keanu confirmed. "I just think this is a teaching moment." Michael rubbed his temples on the other end. "That's one way to put it. I swear, Keanu, if I had known— That's the thing, Michael, Keanu interrupted gently. You shouldn't have to know. This kind of treatment doesn't just affect people like me, it affects people every day. Someone who doesn't look wealthy enough gets turned away, made to feel like they don't matter. That's a problem. Michael exhaled slowly. He had known Keanu for years, and if there was one thing he understood, it was that Keanu never acted out of malice or revenge. He wasn't here to make a scene or humiliate anyone. He was here to make a point. All right, Michael said finally. What are you thinking? Keanu's eyes flickered back toward Lavelle Lux in the distance, its glass facade gleaming under the last rays of the sun. His voice was calm but firm when he spoke next. I'd like to come back tomorrow, but this time let's make sure they know exactly who I am. The following morning, Lavelle Lux opened its doors as usual, the air inside thick with exclusivity. The staff, pristine in their tailored suits and polished shoes, prepared for another day of catering to the rich and powerful. Ryan, still feeling smug about yesterday's interaction, stood near the front, scanning for high-profile customers, the kind that exuded money and status. He barely even thought about the man he had turned away. He was just another nameless visitor who didn't belong. But then, something unexpected happened. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside the store, its windows tinted, its presence commanding attention. A well-dressed driver stepped out first, walking with purpose to open the back door. And out stepped Keanu Reeves. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him followed two assistants in sharp suits, along with a well-known business associate, a man whose very name carried weight in the luxury industry, and just behind them, a discreet cameraman, there to document but not interfere. The energy in the store shifted instantly. The murmurs began almost immediately. Customers turned, eyes widening as they recognized him. Employees froze in place, their polished facades faltering. Ryan's face drained of color. Keanu walked toward the entrance with the same casual, unhurried stride as the day before, but now there was a quiet authority in his step, a presence that could not be ignored. Before Ryan could speak, Michael Langford himself appeared, emerging from a private office at the back. His face was carefully composed, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes. "Mr. Reeves," Michael said smoothly, stepping forward to shake his hand. "Welcome back. It's an honor to have you here." Keanu's expression remained neutral, though there was the slightest hint of amusement in his eyes. "Thank you, Michael. It's good to be back." Ryan, still standing near the entrance, looked as though he wished the ground would swallow him whole, his hands clenched at his sides, his once confident posture wilting under the weight of realization. He had turned away one of the most famous actors in the world, and now he was back. And he wasn't done yet. Inside Lavelle Lux, the once pristine atmosphere of exclusivity now felt thick with unease. Whispers spread like wildfire among the staff and customers, their eyes locked onto the unfolding scene. Keanu Reeves, the man who had been so casually dismissed the day before, now stood in the center of the boutique, his presence commanding yet effortlessly calm. He was no longer just a nameless visitor in faded jeans. He was Keanu Reeves, one of the most revered actors in the world, and every person in the room felt the weight of that realization. The silence stretched, oppressive and unbroken, until Michael Langford, the boutique's owner, turned toward the employees, his sharp gaze landing on Ryan, the salesperson who had so confidently turned Keanu away. Ryan, once oozing with arrogance, now looked as if he wanted to disappear into the marble floor beneath him. The blood had drained from his face, his previous certainty replaced by raw panic. He had made an assumption, a costly one, and now it was coming back to haunt him. Keanu didn't move right away. He let the moment hang, allowing the weight of it to settle over everyone in the room. There was no anger in his eyes, no gloating or satisfaction, only a quiet patience, as if he were waiting to see if the lesson had already begun to take root. Michael's voice was the first to break the silence. "Mr. Reeves," he said smoothly, though his tone was tight, "I'd like to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. This is not how we conduct business." Keanu's gaze flickered toward Michael, his face calm but unreadable. "I appreciate that, Michael," Keanu said, his voice steady, "but I didn't come here for an apology." The words sent a fresh ripple of unease through the boutique. The employees exchanged nervous glances, unsure of where this was going. Keanu finally turned to Ryan, his expression neutral yet piercing. "I believe we've met before," he said, tilting his head slightly. Ryan swallowed hard, nodding stiffly. "Yes, sir. We have." Keanu let the words settle before continuing. "Yesterday, when I walked into this store, you judged me the moment you saw me." His voice wasn't accusatory, but rather factual, deliberate. "You didn't ask me what I was looking for. You didn't even give me a chance. Instead, you made an assumption about who I was and what I could afford, based entirely on the way I looked." Ryan's hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu lifted a hand, a small, quiet gesture that stopped the words in their tracks. "I'm not here to humiliate you," he said simply. "I'm here because I want you to understand something. Something bigger than just yesterday's mistake." The boutique was so silent that even the faint hum of the air conditioning felt deafening. Every pair of eyes was on Keanu now. He took a slow step forward, his presence measured, but undeniably powerful. "What if I hadn't been me?" he asked, his voice quieter now, forcing everyone to lean in. "What if I had been someone else? Someone who had spent years saving up for a special gift, only to be treated like they weren't worthy of stepping inside?" Ryan's breathing was uneven, his lips slightly parted as he struggled to find an answer. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "How many people have you turned away?" The question hit with the force of a hammer. Ryan's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his mind racing through memories of past interactions. Of all the people he had dismissed without a second thought, all the judgments he had made before even speaking a word. How many times had he been wrong? Keanu exhaled softly, shaking his head. "Respect isn't something you reserve for people who look like they belong." His voice was still gentle, but there was an undeniable weight behind it. "It's something you give freely, because every person, no matter what they wear, no matter where they come from, deserves to be treated with dignity." Ryan's chest rose and fell rapidly, his face burning with shame. He had been taught to cater to wealth, to judge who was important based on appearance and status. And now, standing in front of the one man he had misjudged so completely, he realized just how deeply flawed that mindset was. Michael cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly. "Keanu," he said carefully, "I can assure you that we will be implementing new policies. This kind of treatment will not happen again." Keanu studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Because it's not just about me, Michael. It's about every person who has ever walked into a place like this and felt like they didn't belong." A moment of silence stretched between them before Michael sighed. "You're right." His gaze flicked toward Ryan and the rest of the staff. "And we have a lot to change." Keanu nodded once in acknowledgement before turning his attention back to the display case that had first caught his eye the day before. "Now," he said, his voice lighter, though still tinged with quiet authority, "let's talk business." The tension in the room shifted, though it didn't disappear completely. The employees stood still, watching as Keanu gestured toward the luxury watch he had originally intended to purchase. "I'd like to buy that one," he said simply. Ryan, still shaken, quickly moved behind the counter, hands fumbling slightly as he retrieved the watch. He handled it with deliberate care, his usual air of superiority replaced by genuine humility. When he handed it over, Keanu took it but didn't immediately turn away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his credit card and placed it on the counter. The black card. No limit. The very same type of card Ryan had refused to acknowledge the day before. The irony was undeniable. Ryan's fingers trembled slightly as he processed the payment. When he handed the bag to Keanu, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu met his gaze, offering a small, knowing smile. "You're welcome. And Ryan," He paused. "Try to be a little more open-minded next time." Ryan nodded quickly, his expression one of earnest reflection. "I will." As Keanu turned to leave, the store felt different, not just because of his presence, but because of what had just transpired. He had not demanded revenge. He had not sought to shame or destroy. Instead, he had chosen to teach. And that, more than anything, was what made him truly powerful. As he stepped out into the sunlit streets of Rodeo Drive, his mission was complete. But the lesson he had left behind? That would last far longer than any watch he had just purchased. The moment Keanu Reeves stepped out of Lavelle Lux, the boutique felt strangely altered, as if an invisible weight had been lifted, but another had taken its place. The pristine luxury store, once a fortress of exclusivity and silent judgment, was now a place of reflection and unease. Inside, the staff stood motionless, their faces etched with a mix of shame, disbelief, and quiet contemplation. The lesson Keanu had imparted wasn't just about one man's mistake. It was about the culture of discrimination and assumptions that had long dictated how places like this operated. Ryan, the young salesperson who had dismissed Keanu the day before, leaned against the counter, his hands still trembling from the encounter. He exhaled slowly, his chest tightening with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time: guilt. He had always prided himself on identifying real customers, on knowing who deserved attention and who didn't. Yet today, he had learned the hardest lesson of his career, one that would haunt him for a long time. "What have I done?" he murmured under his breath. Michael Langford, the boutique's owner, had been silent for several moments, his arms crossed as he processed everything. He had spent years building Lavelle Lux into an untouchable name, a place where only the wealthiest, most elite clientele were catered to. But today, his own arrogance had been laid bare. Keanu hadn't lashed out, hadn't demanded retribution, but that only made it worse. He had held up a mirror to them all, exposing the ugly truth that had always existed beneath the boutique's glittering surface. Michael ran a hand over his face, his mind racing. The world outside was changing, and he knew that if Lavelle Lux didn't change with it, it would be left behind. It didn't take long for the news to spread. A handful of customers had witnessed the interaction, some recording snippets of the conversation on their phones. Within an hour, the first videos had been uploaded to social media. The captions varied, but the sentiment remained the same. Keanu Reeves just exposed this luxury store, and they deserved it. The most humble man in Hollywood teaches a lesson in respect. You won't believe how this boutique treated Keanu Reeves. The internet was ruthless, and within hours, respect everyone and Keanu Reeves' lesson were trending worldwide. News outlets picked up the story, and before nightfall, Lavelle Lux had become the center of an intense public backlash. On Yelp, the boutique's reviews plummeted from 5 stars to 1.5. Pretentious and rude. If you don't wear a tuxedo, they treat you like garbage. If Keanu Reeves gets mistreated here, what chance do regular people have? This store just lost a lifetime customer. Be better. Michael watched the fallout unfold in real time, his jaw tightening with every passing minute. This was a disaster. His phone buzzed with calls from corporate executives, demanding to know what was being done to fix this. Investors were nervous. Regular clients were distancing themselves from the store. Some of their biggest spenders had canceled upcoming appointments, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. It wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a reckoning. The next morning, before the boutique even opened, Michael gathered his entire staff in the back room. The air was heavy, the weight of last night's events sitting squarely on their shoulders. Ryan sat toward the back, his usual self-assured confidence completely shattered. Michael took a slow breath before speaking. "Let's be honest," he began, his voice sharp but not angry. "We messed up, and now the whole world knows it." No one dared to argue. His eyes landed on Ryan. "I want to hear it from you. What happened yesterday?" Ryan's mouth was dry. He swallowed before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw a man walk in, and I assumed he wasn't supposed to be here." He exhaled shakily. I thought I was protecting the brand. Michael nodded, letting the confession settle. And now? Ryan looked down at the floor, shame thick in his voice. Now, I realize how wrong I was. I didn't even give him a chance. Michael crossed his arms. And that's the problem. It's not just you, Ryan. It's the culture we created. A few employees shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging guilty looks. Michael's voice was firm. I built this store with a very clear vision, to cater to the elite. But in doing so, I created something that lacks basic human decency. He exhaled heavily. That ends today. The room was silent, everyone waiting for what would come next. Michael turned to his assistant manager. Effective immediately, we're implementing changes. First, a full review of our customer service policies. Second, mandatory inclusivity training for every employee. A few nods, others looked relieved, as if they had been waiting for this change for years. Then Michael turned back to Ryan. You made a mistake, a big one, but do you want to make it right? Ryan nodded quickly. Yes, I do. Michael stared at him for a long moment before finally saying, Then prove it. A redemption arc. The public apology. That afternoon, Lavelle Lux issued a formal apology on a cold Brooklyn night. A struggling teen, Ethan Brooks, unknowingly rescues Keanu Reeves, a man with a lost past and dangerous enemies. As mysterious pursuers close in, secrets unravel, forcing them into a high-stakes chase. What truth lies hidden in Keanu's forgotten memories? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The wind cut through Brooklyn's empty streets like a blade, carrying flurries of snow that dusted the cracked pavement. Streetlights flickered, casting eerie, elongated shadows over the crumbling sidewalks. It was a night for warmth, for families huddled in their homes, the scent of hot chocolate and firewood filling their spaces. But Ethan Brooks had no such luxury. At 15, he had already learned that life didn't wait for kindness. It took. It pushed. It expected you to survive, even when the world seemed determined to break you. His mother worked herself to the bone, cleaning offices during the day, waiting tables at night, just to keep a roof over their heads. And Ethan? He did whatever he could. Odd jobs, running errands, anything to scrape together a few extra dollars so his mother wouldn't have to bear it all alone. Tonight was no different. His fingers, numb from the cold, tucked deeper into his worn-out hoodie as he made his way from the convenience store. He had just finished helping the owner stock shelves. Payment? A couple of wrinkled bills and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Not much, but enough. He exhaled sharply, his breath misting in the frigid air, and pulled his hood tighter around his face. Just a few more blocks to the subway, then home. That's when he saw him. At first, Ethan thought it was just another homeless man. Brooklyn had plenty of those, and he had learned to keep moving, to mind his own business. But something about the figure near the alleyway made him pause. The man slumped against the brick wall wasn't just wearing rags. His long black coat, though torn and dirtied, was expensive. The boots on his feet, scuffed but undeniably high quality, stood out against the usual worn sneakers of those sleeping rough. And then there was the stillness. People on the streets shifted in their sleep, adjusting, murmuring. This man? He barely seemed to be breathing. Ethan hesitated, the warnings from his mother echoing in his mind. Stay out of trouble. Don't go looking for danger. But his instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive all these years, whispered something different. Hey, mister, he called out, cautiously stepping closer. No response. He took another step. The man's shoulder-length hair obscured his face, his breathing shallow. Mister, you okay? Ethan bent down, nudging him lightly. The man groaned softly, and then, for just a brief moment, his face shifted into the dim streetlight. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. He blinked, shook his head. No way. Keanu Reeves? He whispered, his voice barely audible against the wind. It couldn't be. What would a world-famous actor be doing in a freezing Brooklyn alley, looking like he had been through hell? Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. Whatever had happened to this man, whoever had done this, it wasn't just some bad night. It was something much worse. And now, Ethan was a part of it. The moment Ethan realized who the man slumped against the alley wall was, the world seemed to shift. His breath caught in his throat, his mind struggling to make sense of it. Keanu Reeves? Here? Like this? It felt impossible. This was the man he had seen on movie posters, on billboards, the man who had played legends on the big screen. But this wasn't the Hollywood icon. This was a man broken, bruised, barely conscious. A gust of icy wind snapped Ethan out of his thoughts. He glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed they were. Brooklyn's streets were unpredictable at night, dangerous, even for someone like him who had grown up learning which corners to avoid. And now he had Keanu Reeves, battered and freezing, with no idea how he got here. This ain't normal. This ain't some drunk guy who just passed out in the wrong place. Ethan's instincts screamed at him. Whatever had happened, whoever had left him here like this, it wasn't random. He crouched down, shaking Keanu's shoulder a little harder. "Mister, hey, can you hear me?" His voice was firm, urgent. Keanu's eyelids fluttered open, dark brown eyes unfocused, filled with something Ethan couldn't quite name. Pain, confusion, maybe even fear. He tried to shift, but the movement sent a sharp grimace across his face. His hand instinctively clutched his side, and that's when Ethan saw it. The tear in his shirt, the deepening bruise spreading across his ribs. "You're hurt," Ethan muttered, his concern deepening. He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out the half-sill bottle of water he had saved from earlier. Twisting the cap off, he held it to Keanu's lips. "Drink this." Keanu swallowed greedily, but as soon as the cold water hit his throat, he coughed violently, his body shuddering from the effort. Ethan tightened his grip on the bottle, steadying him. The man looked like he hadn't had water in hours, maybe longer. After a few seconds, Keanu managed a weak breath. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice hoarse but unmistakable. Even in this state, there was something about his presence, something steady, something real. But as he tried to sit up further, a sharp groan escaped him. "Hey, take it easy, man," Ethan warned. He pressed a hand against Keanu's shoulder, gently keeping him in place. "What happened to you?" Keanu's brows knit together. He blinked, as if trying to push through the fog in his mind. I don't remember," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan swallowed. That wasn't a good sign. "You don't remember anything?" Keanu closed his eyes briefly, his head shaking slightly. "I remember being followed, and then nothing." Ethan's stomach twisted. Followed? By who? He studied Keanu's face, searching for any sign of clarity, but it was obvious. The man was running on fumes, and his memory was slipping through his fingers. For a moment, Ethan considered calling the cops, but then just as quickly he dismissed the thought. The police didn't care about kids like him. They didn't care about people struggling in the streets. And if someone powerful had done this to Keanu, Ethan had no doubt the cops would either brush it off or, worse, take him in for reasons he didn't understand. No way. Not happening. Ethan exhaled sharply, making a decision. "All right, come on, mister. We gotta get you somewhere warm." Keanu flinched as Ethan slipped an arm under his shoulder, trying to help him up. He was heavier than he looked, his muscles dead weight from exhaustion. "Man, you don't look this heavy in the movies," Ethan muttered as he struggled to support him. A faint, almost amused breath of laughter escaped Keanu's lips. "That's because I have stunt doubles." Ethan smirked despite himself. "Yeah, well, ain't nobody here to do the heavy lifting, so work with me." Slowly, with gritted teeth and effort, Keanu managed to get to his feet. He was unsteady, his steps shaky, but he stayed upright. Ethan kept a firm grip on him. Where do I even take him? The thought raced through his mind. His tiny apartment was out of the question. His mother would have too many questions, and he couldn't risk getting her involved. That left only one option. He led Keanu through the dimly lit streets, careful to keep them out of sight. A few blocks away, hidden behind an old auto shop, was an abandoned warehouse, one of the few places Ethan knew well enough to guarantee privacy. He had used it before, on nights when home didn't feel safe, when life had been too much. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. When they finally reached the warehouse, Ethan kicked open the rusted door, helping Keanu inside. The space was cold, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust, but at least it was out of the wind. Ethan guided Keanu toward a worn-out mattress he had stashed in the corner. "Sit," he instructed. Keanu didn't argue. He sank onto the mattress with a tired sigh, his body clearly aching from every movement. "I'll get you something to eat," Ethan said, already heading toward the exit. "Wait," Keanu called, his voice still weak. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan paused at the door, his hand resting against the frame. He could have given a dozen answers, but only one felt true. "'Cause somebody's gotta." Then he was gone, slipping back into the night. It didn't take him long to return. He spent his last few dollars at a nearby food stand, buying a steaming cup of soup and a piece of bread. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and right now, warmth meant survival. Keanu was still awake when he got back, his eyes flickering toward Ethan as he handed him the food. "Eat this," Ethan said. "It'll help." Keanu hesitated before taking the cup in his hands. He sipped carefully, letting the warmth settle into his bones. Color returned to his face, just a little. Ethan sat down across from him, watching him closely. "You really don't remember anything?" Keanu exhaled, rubbing his forehead. I don't know. I feel like I should, but it's like my brain is just blank." Ethan frowned. That wasn't normal. Someone didn't just lose their memory for no reason. Something happened to him. Something bad. Then, just as Ethan was about to say something, a strange sound cut through the silence. Ethan's eyes snapped toward Keanu's coat. There, barely visible in the dim light, was a faint glow coming from inside one of the pockets. Frowning, Ethan leaned forward. "You got a phone or something?" Keanu shook his head. "I don't think so." Ethan hesitated before carefully reaching into the coat pocket. His fingers brushed against something cold, metallic. He pulled it out. A watch. But not just any watch. This thing looked high-tech, sleek, expensive, futuristic. The small screen on its surface flashed a message in bright red letters: "Tracking signal activated." Ethan's breath caught. His grip tightened around the device. Someone was looking for Keanu, and now they knew exactly where he was. The cold, damp air of the warehouse wrapped around Ethan like an unwelcome presence. The moment he saw the words "tracking signal activated" flashing on the sleek high-tech watch, a chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the winter night. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the device over in his hands. It didn't look like any ordinary watch. It was something else entirely, something dangerous. He exhaled sharply, stealing a glance at Keanu, whose tired eyes were still trying to focus through the haze of exhaustion and pain. "Keanu," Ethan whispered, keeping his voice low, as if speaking too loudly might trigger something. "What is this?" Keanu sat up a little, his movements slow and deliberate, wincing from the bruises along his ribs. He frowned at the device in Ethan's hand, as if trying to will himself to remember. The weight of it felt familiar, but his mind was still a fogged-up maze with no clear exits. I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Well, someone does," he muttered, tapping the glass screen. "And if this thing is tracking you, we don't have time to sit around." A sudden noise outside sent Ethan's heart into his throat, a car engine, low and controlled, rolling to a stop. His instincts kicked in immediately. He dropped the watch into his hoodie pocket and grabbed Keanu's arm. "We gotta move," he hissed. Keanu stiffened. "Why? What did you hear?" Car just pulled up. Could be nothing, but I don't like coincidences. Keanu forced himself up despite the pain, his breath hitching as his side protested. Ethan let him lean against him for support, the weight almost too much for the 15-year-old, but he gritted his teeth and helped Keanu toward the back exit of the warehouse. His mind was racing. If someone really was tracking Keanu, there was no telling how long they had before things went bad. They reached the rusted metal door just as the sound of car doors opening reached them. Ethan's stomach clenched. Footsteps, heavy, methodical, crunched against the pavement outside. These weren't just some random thugs looking for trouble. Whoever they were, they moved like professionals. Keanu's grip on Ethan's shoulder tightened. "We don't have much time," he murmured. Ethan scanned the exit door. It was chained shut from the outside. His pulse pounded. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, searching for another way out. Then, the front entrance of the warehouse creaked open. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. "We know you're in there," a deep voice called out, smooth yet authoritative. "Make this easy on yourselves." Keanu and Ethan locked eyes. "Run." The unspoken word passed between them in an instant. Ethan made a split-second decision, grabbing Keanu and dragging him toward the only other escape route, the fire escape ladder leading to the roof. But just as they reached it, the warehouse door was kicked open with a deafening crash. Ethan barely had time to react before the first man stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in all black, tactical gear, bulletproof vest, everything. His eyes scanned the space like a predator hunting its prey, and behind him more men followed, their presence filling the warehouse like a wave of impending doom. Ethan's breath stilled. These weren't cops. These weren't gangsters. These were something else entirely. Keanu grabbed Ethan's wrist. "Go," he urged in a whisper. Ethan hesitated. His entire life he had avoided trouble, done whatever it took to survive without getting caught up in the kind of danger that left people dead in alleyways. But now, for the first time, he wasn't just running for himself, he was running for someone else. Someone who had no idea why they were after him. Summoning every ounce of nerve he had, Ethan hoisted himself onto the fire escape ladder and started climbing. Keanu followed, slower but determined. "Hey!" one of the men shouted. Gunfire erupted. The sound of bullets ricocheting against metal sent shockwaves through Ethan's body. He climbed faster, adrenaline surging, his hands aching from gripping the cold rungs. Keanu was just behind him, moving as fast as his injured body would allow. They reached the rooftop just as the men stormed toward the ladder below. Ethan barely had time to catch his breath before Keanu pointed toward the next building. "We jump." Ethan's eyes widened. The gap between rooftops wasn't huge, but for someone running on fear and exhaustion, it might as well have been a canyon. The men below were shouting orders. Ethan could hear their boots stomping against the metal of the fire escape. No time. Ethan backed up, took a deep breath, and ran. For a second he was weightless. The world blurred around him, the cold air rushing past his face. Then, impact. He hit the rooftop hard, rolling onto his side with a grunt. But he was alive. Keanu was right behind him. He landed with a stagger, nearly collapsing from the pain in his ribs, but he stayed upright. They kept running. Below them, the men were already in pursuit, their shadows stretching along the alleyways like monsters in the dark. "This way!" Ethan shouted, leading them toward a rooftop exit that connected to the building's stairwell. If they could get inside, they might have a chance to disappear into the city. They sprinted across the rooftop, Ethan reaching the door first. He yanked it open and they tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them. The stairwell was dark and smelled like rust, but it was shelter. Keanu pressed a hand against the wall, his breath labored. Ethan leaned against the railing, heart hammering. For a moment there was silence. Then, a voice crackled through the watch, still tucked in Ethan's pocket. "Keanu, if you're hearing this, you're in danger, and you don't have much time." Ethan froze. Keanu's head snapped toward him. "Who is that?" Ethan pulled the watch out, staring at the glowing screen. The voice was distorted, masked, but there was something chillingly urgent about it. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but whoever it is, they know exactly what's going on." The message continued. "You need to get to Washington, D.C. There's someone there who can help you, but you can't let them catch you. If they do, it's over." The watch beeped once, then silence. Ethan and Keanu exchanged looks. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the sound of men storming the rooftop echoed through the stairwell. Keanu straightened, the pain in his body momentarily forgotten. "We need to go." Ethan nodded, swallowing the fear that threatened to take hold. Washington, D.C. It didn't make sense. It was hundreds of miles away, but if there was even a chance that someone there had the answers Keanu needed, then they had no choice. They had to run, and this time there was no turning back. The train ride to Washington, D.C. felt longer than it should have. Ethan sat stiffly in his seat, his hoodie pulled up, hands stuffed in his pockets to keep from fidgeting. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. He had never been out of Brooklyn before, let alone on a train headed straight into the unknown, with a man who was being hunted like a fugitive. And yet here he was, sitting across from Keanu Reeves, who was staring out the window with a faraway look in his eyes, lost in a storm of memories that refused to surface. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "You think we can trust whoever sent that message?" His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but Keanu's eyes flicked to him immediately. Keanu exhaled, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't think we have a choice." That wasn't exactly comforting. Ethan shifted in his seat, his knee bouncing. "Yeah, well, I'd rather not walk into a trap." Keanu's lips twitched into something that might have been amusement, but there was no humor in his eyes. "Me neither." The train rumbled on, the rhythmic clacking of the wheels against the tracks filling the silence. The world outside was a blur of darkened landscapes, interrupted only by the occasional glow of distant city lights. They were running. Again, but this time they had a destination, a lead. And the men who were after them? They weren't going to let them get there without a fight. Ethan kept glancing around the train car, scanning for anything suspicious. A woman in a business suit scrolled through her phone a few seats away. An older man snored softly, head tilted against the window. A group of college students laughed quietly near the back. It all seemed normal, too normal. But Ethan had lived his whole life knowing that trouble didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blended right in. Keanu must have sensed his tension because he leaned forward slightly. "Relax," he murmured. "If we act like we're running, someone will notice." Ethan frowned. "We are running." Keanu smirked, but it faded quickly. His gaze drifted toward the aisle. "Yeah," he said quietly. "And they know." Ethan followed his gaze and his stomach dropped. A man had just entered the train car. Dressed in a dark suit, he looked like any other commuter at first glance, but there was something off. His posture, the way his eyes scanned the passengers too carefully, how his hand rested near his side, where a gun might be holstered beneath his jacket. He wasn't alone. A second man, leaner but just as dangerous looking, entered from the opposite end of the car. They weren't here by accident. Ethan's pulse pounded. "We got company." Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. He sat up straighter, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for what was coming. "Stay calm," he murmured. "We don't make a move unless they do." Ethan swallowed hard. "And if they do?" Keanu's gaze locked onto the approaching men, his jaw tightening. "Then we make them regret it." The first man moved closer, his eyes flickering toward Keanu with recognition. He reached into his coat, and Ethan's instinct screamed at him. Now or never. Without thinking, Ethan kicked the small table between them, sending it crashing into the man's legs. The agent stumbled back, cursing. Keanu was already moving. In a blur of motion, he grabbed Ethan and yanked him into the aisle just as the second agent reached for his weapon. The train lurched, throwing passengers off balance. Shouts erupted as people scrambled away from the sudden chaos. The first agent recovered fast, drawing a gun, but Keanu reacted faster. He slammed his palm into the man's wrist, twisting the weapon free and sending it skidding under a seat. Ethan ducked as the second agent lunged at him. Without thinking, he swung his elbow back, catching the man in the ribs. The agent grunted but didn't go down. Instead, he grabbed Ethan by the hoodie and yanked him backward. Panic flared in Ethan's chest. The guy was strong, too strong. But before the agent could do anything else, Keanu was there. He moved like a ghost, swift and brutal, driving his knee into the man's stomach before shoving him hard against the train's metal wall. The agent slumped, groaning. The first man, still recovering, reached for something in his jacket. A knife. Keanu grabbed Ethan and pulled him down just as the blade slashed through the air where their heads had been. Ethan's heart pounded. "We gotta get off this train." Keanu didn't argue. He grabbed the gun from the floor, tucked it into his jacket, and pulled Ethan toward the next car. Behind them, the agents were already recovering. Passengers screamed as the fight spilled into the next section. Ethan barely registered the blur of terrified faces as they pushed through. Keanu reached the door leading to the outside platform between cars. "Hold on," he warned. "What?" Ethan started, but Keanu had already thrown the door open. Cold wind howled into the train car, the deafening roar of the wheels below making Ethan's stomach twist. Keanu glanced at him. "You trust me?" Ethan stared at the speeding landscape beyond the open doorway, then back at Keanu. "Not even a little." Keanu smirked. "Good enough." Then, without hesitation, he jumped. Ethan's breath caught as he watched Keanu disappear into the darkness. "Are you kidding me?" Ethan shouted. He didn't have time to hesitate. Behind him, the agents were closing in. Ethan took a deep breath and jumped. The moment his feet left the train, time slowed. Wind tore at his clothes. The world spun. The ground rushed toward him. Then, impact. He hit the ground hard, rolling through the dirt, his body slamming into the cold earth. Pain exploded through his limbs, but he was alive. Somehow. Groaning, he pushed himself up, coughing against the dust. His vision swam, but through the haze, he saw Keanu already on his feet, scanning the area. A second later, a deafening bang rang out. The train was still speeding past, but now, gunfire. The agents were shooting at them. Keanu grabbed Ethan and pulled him toward the tree line. "Move!" They ran, legs burning, lungs screaming for air. Bullets ripped through the night behind them, kicking up dirt and leaves. Then, silence. They reached the cover of the trees, breathless, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Ethan leaned against a tree, panting. "Okay, that was insane." Keanu chuckled, rubbing his sore shoulder. "Welcome to my life." Ethan groaned. "Remind me why I'm helping you again?" Keanu clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Because you're a good kid." Ethan rolled his eyes. Yeah, whatever. Now what?" Keanu pulled the watch from his pocket, checking the coordinates. Washington, D.C. wasn't far now. He met Ethan's gaze. "Now, we finish this." And with that, they disappeared into the night, heading toward the answers that could either save them or destroy them both. The night air was thick with tension as Keanu and Ethan navigated the darkened streets of Washington, D.C. The weight of everything they had uncovered pressed heavily on them, but the most dangerous part of their journey was still ahead. They had made it this far, outwitting the agents on the train, surviving the brutal chase through the city, but now they were heading straight into the belly of the beast, the Hive. The coordinates on the tracking device led them to an unassuming building nestled in an old part of the city. From the outside, it looked abandoned, an old government facility with boarded-up windows and a chain-wrapped front entrance. But Keanu knew better. The Hive wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. Ethan hesitated, eyeing the dark structure. "You sure about this?" His voice was steady, but Keanu could hear the nervous edge in it. Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned their surroundings. The streets were empty, too quiet. "No," he admitted. "But we don't have a choice." Ethan huffed. "Yeah, That's what I was afraid of. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. Keanu led the way, his instincts sharper than ever. The building's main entrance was locked, but he had already spotted an alternative, a narrow alley running alongside the facility that led to an old service door. It looked rusted shut, but Ethan was small enough to slip through a broken window just above it. Ethan grimaced as he hoisted himself up, slipping through the jagged opening and landing softly inside. "All right, I'm in," he whispered. Keanu exhaled. "See if you can get the door open." A few tense seconds passed before he heard the faint click of a lock disengaging. The service door creaked open just enough for Keanu to slip inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of forgotten things. The hallway stretched before them, dimly illuminated by a flickering emergency light. It looked like no one had set foot in here for years, but Keanu knew that was a lie. This place was alive with secrets. They moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the dust-covered floor. The deeper they went, the stronger the unease settled in Keanu's gut. Something wasn't right. Then he saw it. A surveillance camera, barely visible in the corner of the ceiling, its red light blinking. "We're not alone," Keanu muttered. Ethan swallowed